USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to Weekend Review for Monday, January 18th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. You know, after weeks of not much movement among the top teams in Division I men's college hockey, Jim, we had a weekend where there was a little bit of turmoil. And right at the top of the list, number one Minnesota going down and getting swept at home by Notre Dame. And that's 3 losses in 4 games for the Golden Gophers.
You know, it wasn't too long ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. You and I sat on this podcast, and I know I also recorded something with the Big Ten Network where I said, you know, not the worst thing to lose a game here and there. I don't think that this is what Minnesota had in mind, though. This was, you know, they've now dropped, as you mentioned, 3 out of 4. And both nights, I just thought that they got a little bit outplayed by Notre Dame. I felt that, you know, Notre Dame was obviously opportunistic. Both games were tied in the third period. They found ways to win both of them. But I just look at the Irish as the team that finished this week. And that is the one area that I think I have talked about with Minnesota really since, you know, the second and third week of the season, that they're getting unbelievable performances on the back end, especially, you know, Jack LaFontaine and net. But the big but was that their offense isn't producing the way that I maybe thought it would at the beginning of the season. And when you get into a tight game and you can't just score that goal when you need it, that big goal, that clutch goal, that's when you start having a problem. That seems to be the issue for Minnesota. And this will be a good dose of humble pie, I think, for this team. Hopefully it wakes them up and makes them realize that, listen, they still have a nice, at least a 3-game cushion really in the Big Ten. And I still feel like they're going to be the top team when all is said and done with this season. But you don't want to get it. You don't want to let a short slide turn into a long slide. And that's what I think Bob Motzko is challenged with the most in these coming weeks.
Well, that did benefit Boston College in today's USCHO.com Division I men's ice hockey poll. BC getting most of the first place votes as a new number 1, though Minnesota, North Dakota, and Minnesota State all getting some nods in that too. But it wasn't easy for Boston College. They really had to battle in that 2-game sweep of Merrimack over the weekend.
I thought Merrimack showed themselves very well. You know, they were down 2 goals in the series opener on Saturday, then really outplayed BC in the third period. They got within a goal and then had Logan Drevich had a very good look. I think it was about 15 and a half seconds left. And Spencer Knight, hey, let's not forget Spencer Knight back from winning gold medals. And now here he is. He's 7-0 this season for the Eagles. Sunday's game, the second game of the series, just the same. You know, BC actually found themselves trailing, had to score 3 in the third, end up winning that one. But it just shows that Merrimack's an improved team. That's one thing I take away from this. I haven't seen a lot of them this year, and now that I'm seeing a little bit more, and they're playing some good games. Listen, they're still 1-7 in the standings, so you're still measured by wins and losses. But they're a better team than they were, and I think that as this season goes on, they're probably going to sneak up and probably surprise a couple of teams.
You know, we've talked over the past few years about parity, and we see it all through college hockey, mainly because there are not enough teams for all the talent is out there. And so when you see a team like Merrimack giving a tough game to Boston College, who's chock full of blue chippers, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise.
No, and it shouldn't. And like I said, I think that last year's Merrimack team left a little bit to be desired, and I think Scotty Borek knew that he had some good players coming in this season, and it takes some time, and to turn good efforts into wins is something that good teams do. Merrimack's not there yet, but like I said, they will probably sneak up on a couple of teams. It'll be, feeling that you can go into North Andover and take a Friday night off and you'll get crushed. You'll lose 5-2. Because that's what a team can do. That's a tough building to play in. Everybody knows it's a little bit of a smaller rink. Like, that's a very hard building to go into. Then you throw on the fact that if you underestimate this team, they have the talent to take it to you. Those combinations will make for a lot of spoilers down the stretch, I think, for Merrimack.
While we're on that subject, when we turn to the NCHC, kind of a shifted weekend, of course, because of COVID issues. a Sunday-Monday series, Denver beating North Dakota pretty handily on Sunday night. But the team that was the surprise over the weekend was Western Michigan. Now, normally it would be towards the end of the first semester where things start to gel with freshmen and so forth. Andy Murray's got 12 freshmen on that team. They, at an empty home arena, which is normally the best, I'm going to say it's the best crowd atmosphere of any arena in college hockey. With an empty barn, Western Michigan swept then number 4 St. Cloud State. 3-0-1 are the Broncos since the start of this calendar year. They are getting the freshmen into play and getting some good goaltending. They took their lumps during the NCHC pod, but there's a lot to like about this Western Michigan team.
Yeah, they did. And you have to go back to the start, their first game. It's midway through the second period. And Brendan Bussey, who was a very good goaltender, not, one of the leading goaltenders, but he was more than a solid goaltender last year as a rookie, an 18-12 record. He gets injured, out for the season. Now you're in a situation where you're Andy Murray, you're trying to figure out what's my next move. And he throws in Austin Kane for a good stretch, 12 games he ends up playing, 12 decisions he ends up getting. And he wasn't the answer. Subpar numbers of more than a 4 goals against average and 866 save percentage. That's not going to get it done. So here we go. The calendar turns, and he turns to a rookie, Alex Aslanidis, and he's been great. I mean, again, not putting up, nation leading numbers, but doing his job. And he ends up with a 3-0-1 record in 4 games and, and obviously a very big weekend sweep of St. Cloud State. And he looked composed. Watching that game on Saturday, I thought that he looked very composed. And that's going to be one of the things that if you're Andy Murray, you're trying to ride a goaltender that can get hot and play well. You've got one right now in Alex Aslanidis. And like you mentioned, some other freshmen coming through. I look at this freshman class, and you have Ty Glover and Luke Granger. They're scoring goals. They're getting involved in the offense. And then you have some of the, your upperclassmen. I look at Drew Ward. He's getting the points, and Ethan Frank, 10 goals in 15 games. Those guys, upperclassmen, those are your leaders. But when you have your freshman class starting to turn and become more seasoned players, that's going to help a lot.
I saw clips from Friday's game and watched most of Saturday's game, nationally televised. Aslanidis looking very solid, very poised and calm. There's this body language that goaltenders give off, and he just looked very comfortable in net. And like you said, that should bode well for the Broncos. Also in the NCHC, halfway through a 2-game series, that was a huge and very important win for Denver. We've been talking about how the Pioneers need to get some W's, and to get one against North Dakota is huge.
Yeah, it was pretty much right when I gave up hope on Denver. I really did. I think that last week was the first week in the poll that I took them out and did not vote for them. I'm not sure I put them back in. I'd have to check my ballot this week. I put them in at 20 this week. They haven't convinced me of anything yet, but when you beat North Dakota and you do it kind of handily 4-1, that's a good sign. And this is the games that I think David Carl believes his team could play back when the pod was starting, and they were losing these types of games, close games down the stretch where you have to kind of put the game away late. They weren't doing that. They were going the other way. They were giving up the tying goal, or they were unable to find the tying goal. They were losing a bunch of 1-goal games. So good sign for them. Obviously, Brad Berry, we're recording this on early Monday. They'll play tonight on the back end of this series. And that's kind of a must-have game for North Dakota. You don't want to start getting yourself into any kind of a rut if you're the Fighting Hawks, because they have been playing so well. And you don't want to start hitting a few bumps in the road here as you're heading almost into the month of February.
In the WCHA, 2 teams have risen to the top. Everybody expected Minnesota State to be there. They're at 7-1-1. Bowling Green, I wouldn't say they're a surprise, but they are playing probably better than most people were expecting at 14-2-0, and also the 1,000th win in program history. And if you were watching social media, all kinds of congratulations from former players, former broadcasters, a reminder of what a storied and great past the Bowling Green program has. And to see the Falcons back up at those heights now must make all of those folks feel pretty good.
You know what? There were some thin years there in Bowling Green, and the reality is that you go back, and we always talk about the man that is the greatest coach of all time, Jerry York. Don't forget, he cut his teeth here. After starting at Clarkson, he headed over to Bowling Green and won them a national championship. You had Buddy Powers there. Scotty Pollock. Maybe there was some thin years there, but he had a few good teams. And we know that Chris Bergeron was solid. And before he moved over to Miami, and he had that program heading in the right direction. And I think that here we go again. Ty Agner, maybe last season, we never really will know how good they were, but it's still a 20-win team. And here they are, 14-2-0, and they're right there in the top of the standings. I really look at my calendar, and you have it circled now, February 5th and 6th. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, that nobody gets COVID issues that weekend between these two teams. But Minnesota State, Bowling Green, they'll finally play out in Mankato. The only two games that they'll play this season because of the schedule and the way things are working out in the WCHA. But that will be a heavyweight battle that weekend, and both teams will be circling that as their opportunity to really prove which team maybe could be better. And if you had to pick one when you're the NCAA committee, if you have to make some sort of an at-large pick, that might be the weekend that you're really trying to convince people out there.
The only regular season matchup between the two of them, and maybe playing for home ice for a championship in the final season of the WCHA. Well, coming up, we'll talk Big Ten, ECAC, Hockey East, Atlantic Hockey, a couple of milestones, and some questions about COVID when Weekend Review continues.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Back with Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, the Big Ten, some sweeps over the weekend, maybe some teams starting to find their place. We already talked about Notre Dame sweeping Minnesota, which was enough to vault them from last place to third place in the Big Ten standings. A couple other teams to look at over the weekend. Michigan with a sweep over Ohio State pretty comfortably, and Wisconsin handling Arizona State. Arizona State with just 5 wins, 11 losses. The NCAA postseason hopes are looking fairly dim for the Sun Devils, but Michigan, Wisconsin, both really strong weekends.
You know what? I've been kind of harping on the fact that both of these teams, good teams that have not proven their consistency, and other than some pretty good starts for each team, they've lost a little bit of that consistency. And you see them each have usually one good weekend, one good game a weekend, and then one not so good game a weekend. And you had a lot of splits, and here you are. I think both teams entered this weekend at 6-6 overall. They both sweep. They're both 8-6. But they need this. You've got to start getting on these runs. This is the time of year. I always say that February 1st is the top of the roller coaster. And as you're slowly climbing up, once you hit February 1, everything is just it accelerates the pace. And even in this strange COVID year, and we'll get into it with some of the other leagues and teams and whatnot, but you're going to be playing a lot of games, and you're going to be playing a lot of important games down the stretch. So you have to be starting to put get your confidence, get your mental state in a good place. And I think a good sweep for all three of these teams, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Michigan, that'll help them as they go forward.
Let's turn to the ECAC, a big weekend with a little drive time in between for Quinnipiac. 3-0 shutouts of Colgate, both in Hamden, Connecticut, and before that in Hamilton, New York. That puts them right at the top of the 4-team ECAC. A split between the rivals Clarkson and St. Lawrence makes me wonder a little bit about Clarkson, but maybe get a little bit more excited about St. Lawrence. What's the ECAC picture looking like, Jim?
Well, flip a coin. I think maybe you're starting to see that Colgate is not maybe as ready for prime time as the other three teams, but I think we have 3 good clubs here in Quinnipiac, Clarkson, and St. Lawrence. And, if you're going to kind of think about the fact that maybe only 1, maybe 2 of these teams gets an NCAA bid, you could have a pretty good team left out. I've been really bullish on this Quinnipiac team. They had a tough series against Bowling Green where they got swept, but I think that they have good goaltending with Keith Petruzzelli in net, and they're getting the scoring up front. Odin Tufto is still one of the best players in the country, and he's still producing at a nice clip. And I think that this is a Quinnipiac team that, should vie for an NCAA spot. And when they get there, they are a team that can be dangerous. And that's one of the things you have to remember. When you look at Rand Pecknold coach teams, you don't see, especially in the last 15 years, you don't see a lot of one and done for them in the NCAA tournament. They get there, they're there for the long haul. They've made a couple of Frozen Fours, played in a couple of national championship games. They're in a good position. If they can get this team cranking, they have a lot of those components to be dangerous down the stretch.
When we look at Hockey East, the team that maybe nobody was paying attention to, or at least not as much as they should before the season, was UConn. 2 11-goal games, a 6-5 overtime win, 8-3 in the other half of it, sweeping New Hampshire over the weekend.
I've liked a lot about this UConn team this year. Coming in, I think I in my preseason, I think I might have picked them fourth. But they have some components, and you saw it getting going this weekend. Johnny Evans, he gets 3 goals on the weekend. Carter Turnbull, he gets a hat trick on Friday, including the overtime game winner. Joakim Kondolik, he's back from the World Juniors, where he played for Russia. He had 5 assists this week, and he has 11 points, all of them assists thus far this season. He's a guy that gets really involved in the offense, and when they're scoring, he's usually a big part of it. This is a good team, and they have a good back end as well. They might let up too many opportunities, but when their goaltending gets going, they're very dangerous. And I just kind of look at this as a UConn team. They're not there yet. I think they're kind of knocking on the door of top 4, but you also haven't had some teams, BU and UMass Lowell, I think percentage wise are ahead of them in the standings. BU's played 3 games, Lowell's played 4. So that's the big difference. UConn's getting their games played, and they're having some success this weekend against UNH. Obviously, was something that kind of stood out to me. And they played 2 very solid games, found a way to win on Friday, and then really handled UNH on Saturday.
Speaking of BU, they got the win on Sunday over UMass, the rubber match of that weekend. Well, how do you have a rubber match with 2 games? But anyway, the other half of that series is this afternoon. A good win for BU. Got to be disappointing for UMass.
Maybe, but I think you understand that this BU team, nobody knows a lot about them at this point. They have a lot of talent. I mean, this is a team that's pretty deep. It's whether you can make that talent mesh together. I know they gave up a lot of goals in the first game against Providence a couple of weeks ago. But for them, I think that both of these teams, well, more so BU, the good news of this weekend was that they're getting the games played. These games look like they were going to be postponed. They were supposed to be played Friday, Saturday. The league, came out on Thursday saying those games were off, and then I think it was probably not until Friday night or Saturday that they came back and said we'll play these games, but they'll be Sunday, Monday. What I believe, and we'll get into this with some COVID, so I think it's more testing protocol. That's what delayed this series. But listen, your BU, they're going to play their back end here on Monday. We're recording in the morning. They play a 3:00 game. I think that this is a team that needs you to start getting reps. You got to get games played, and for them, good games against good opponents like UMass should give a lot of positive thoughts in that locker room.
Turning to Atlantic hockey, just 1 game out of all of them scheduled happened over the weekend, and it was the cancellation of 2 trips to Air Force, 1 for Army and 1 for Long Island University, that allowed a 2-game series to happen at Army West Point. The first meeting between Brett Riley and his uncle Brian Riley ended up in a split, an overtime win over Army on Saturday.
What a great story. We talked about it a little bit on Game of the Week, and obviously I looking at social media, Brett had, not even really ribbing, just a real proud moment to be able to earn a win for his team against a family member. And this is a legendary hockey family. You go back to Jack Riley and Rob Riley, Brian Riley, Billy Riley, who was the godfather of hockey up in UMass Lowell, and now Brett Riley. And there's just so many faces in this crowd and in this bunch that did so much and have done a lot for college hockey. Now you get the next generation. A win like that probably felt really good for him and his LIU team. The
one thing that has been bugging me over the last few days is trying to understand what is going on in different leagues, different teams with COVID-19 protocols. Back before the season started and things got underway, everybody had a return to play plan. And some of these are like 30, 40 pages of details. The NCAA put stuff together, each conference, individual schools. And in that was set up from each league what number of players were required to have a game and what number of coaches. For example, in Atlantic hockey, it was 13 skaters, 2 goalies, and 1 coach to be able to play. Yet what we're seeing in scheduling, canceling, postponements doesn't seem to line up with that. And you see different things. For example, we had a team over the weekend that had play delayed by a day. That was Arizona State. They had players out of the lineup. They did testing. They had enough players to play. They played. Likewise, you have teams with 1 positive and they go on pause. And you even have teams where both teams have no positives, but because there may have been some contact a few days before, they just call things off. There doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason. And as things have gone on, what has been said publicly has been pretty tight-lipped from just about everybody. So I'm wondering what is going on. I've been trying to get some answers. I've talked to people, and a lot of people I've talked to are not sure exactly what's going on. Do you have a take on this, Jim? What are your thoughts on this?
There's a lot of components to what you just kind of presented, and I'll start with the most obvious one, and it's when you mentioned a school gets 1 case, they go on pause. We saw that in Vermont this weekend, and that can just come down to the athletic department. That can come down to the state and what they want these schools to be doing. So, some of these schools, don't forget, are still state institutions. But what we haven't really seen yet is any type of punishment from leagues. No league is sitting there saying, well, you couldn't go, you're on pause, you're going to forfeit games. That does not seem to be what commissioners are looking for. All of that said, I think that we're going to have a mad dash down the stretch of the months of February and March. And if you're a team that, let's look at Boston University, they've only played 3 games. They'll be at 4 today. UMass Lowell, they've only played 4 games. They're still in COVID protocols after having some positives. When you're one of those teams, you're going to be playing potentially, 4 games every 7 days because you need to find a way to get 13 games played. Conferences might make an exception, and that, you might be qualifying for your conference tournament. But for what the NCAA has said right now, it doesn't seem like there's going to be exceptions. So if you don't have 13 games played, the NCAA tournament's not a possibility for you. So we're going to see that scrambling. In terms of everything else, and I don't know that in a time like this, in a year like this, that commissioners have wanted to be bad guys. We have seen some leagues. I think we've seen, the Big Ten kind of try to make sure that these programs stay on track. You lose a weekend, you make it up here and there. They haven't also had as many cases, and that we go back to the haves and the have-nots. They have a more robust testing program because of being a Big Five, a Power Five, Division I football conference. So there's more. It's easier to understand how to isolate a player who might test positive, or a staff member who might test positive, or a Zamboni driver that might test positive for that matter. You can do a lot more when you have resources. So let's just take that out of the way. But they have seemed to stay the course. NCHC has had a lot of cancellations since they left their pod. But we've also heard that some of these programs have a pretty high number of cases. And then there's the contact tracing. And that's what most commissioners, when they have talked to me about series is having to be postponed or canceled because of 1 positive case, it's that person was around X number of people. So yes, you might have 1 positive test on your team, but the regulations seem to say that if you were in contact with that person, you're now ineligible. What I have seen, and I don't know if you've seen the same, Ed, but is as this season has gone on, the amount of time that people have to sit out if they are just a contact trace as opposed to a positive case is reducing. And it does seem that they're trying to get multiple tests of those players that are not positive, that they are just contact tracing, get those tests administered, get those players back in the lineup as soon as they can. Again, a program can go on pause and that changes everything. But if it seems like if leagues can get these teams back on the ice faster than what their original protocols said, they will.
Yeah, the amount of time has gone down. Initially, the CDC reduced it from 14 days to 10 days, but then it took individual states longer to follow. New York State took a couple more weeks after that to reduce it from 14 to 10. I guess it is a moving target, and I understand things like HIPAA rules and so forth. You can't expose everything, but it seems like there has been an increasing cloak of secrecy around the decisions, and it's, you don't even see details. You just see COVID protocols.
No doubt about that. I think that leagues have tried to make it more difficult for people on the outside to understand. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. There's usually a reason behind that. Oftentimes it comes with liability. But at the same time, when you leave people in the dark, fans, media, other teams, it creates more confusion sometimes than it's worth. So it's not over. We're going to go through this probably right up until the last game is played. Hopefully that's a national championship game as opposed to just some meaningless regular season game or something like that. But I think we're going to go through this right up until the very end of the season.
With that, we'll wrap it there for this week's edition of Weekend Review. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.